Hello, and welcome to day 3 and the final day of on-chain scaling. I am your host, Jerry David. If you are joining us for the first time, welcome. And not to worry, the conference presentations that took place in the previous days will be made available via video streaming via our website shortly after the conference. As a quick recap of the past sessions, we have heard from people talking about some very interesting medium to long-term solutions that may completely eliminate scaling issues in Bitcoin for good, to some more immediate short-term ones that have already been proposed and implemented, along with the real-world analysis data of their efficacy in alternate clients. We've also heard some talks that have addressed some of the real-world cases of Bitcoin and who uses them and what we're really doing this for. And today we move to the final day of talks, and the schedule is comprised of some talks that will address some more topical and hotly debated issues currently in the Bitcoin world. They deal with more of the economic and the social impact side of the technology, from the prickly topic of hard forks to DAOs and their legality, and even the notion of how to scale the network in general and how we should be going about it, and if there's a certain way that we have to do it or the way we should do it. These questions will really make us think about what is the true nature of a decentralized system and how it operates and what does it really mean. So I hope you'll really enjoy them. The first speaker today, we only have 3 speakers. The first speaker is Meni Rosenfeld. And Meni is a mathematics master's graduate from the Weizmann Institute of Science. I apologize if I pronounced that wrong. Specializing in machine learning. He has worked as the head of research of the internet group in SimilarWeb, where he was in charge of developing algorithms for measuring connections between websites and analyzing web traffic. After being exposed to Bitcoin in March 2011, one of the early guys, he has focused exclusively on activity in this field. He has established the Bitcoin community in Israel, founded Bitcoin, Israel's first Bitcoin exchange service, and performed mathematical research on algorithms that underlie the functioning of the Bitcoin blockchain system. He now serves as the chairman of the Israeli Bitcoin Association. Ladies and gentlemen, I turn you over to Meni Rosenfeld, who will be talking about forks.
Hi everyone, good evening or good morning as the case may be. We are here at a conference which focuses on Bitcoin scaling, and several talks suggested different technical solutions to Bitcoin scaling, which is great. I've also had some contributions on the technical front. For example, my suggestion from 1 year ago for elastic block caps. And we may not all agree which technical approach is best. This is fine. We'll talk, we'll discuss, we'll investigate, and hopefully end up with the best solution. But that's not what I'm here to talk about today. I want to bring the discussion 2 steps up on the scale of abstraction. The first level is the object level, the actual protocols and technical means. The second level is the meta level, or governance model. What happens when we don't all agree on the object level? How to make the choice of which protocol to use. The third level is the meta level. It is about the overall dynamics of the choice of governance model, and about where does the power to make decisions ultimately come from. I'm going to present some views which at one time I assumed were the unspoken shared beliefs of all Bitcoin enthusiasts. When the debate on Bitcoin scaling started to heat up in recent years, I quickly came to realize that not everyone holds the same views. And now I regret that I hadn't spent more time in the past writing explicitly about these matters. Maybe if it was more widely discussed earlier in Bitcoin's history, it could have given us more tools to handle the current debate. The fundamental question underlying this talk is, what controls Bitcoin? Historically, we've had physical currencies, which are controlled by the laws of nature, and we've had centralized currencies, which are controlled by their issuer. But Bitcoin is the first time we've had a decentralized digital currency. And this gives a lot of trouble to people trying to figure out what Bitcoin is ultimately governed by. Inside the Bitcoin community, people often say that Bitcoin is controlled by math, by a protocol, by code, by an algorithm. They say Bitcoin is incorruptible. You can't bribe math. If you hold a gun to math's head, it won't flinch, it won't surrender, it won't do whatever you want. This is in some way true, but it is also very incomplete, because Bitcoin wasn't created by some abstract mathematical entity. It wasn't created by an artificial intelligence. Well, unless Satoshi is an AI, which would actually explain a lot. But it's probably not. And also, Bitcoin wasn't created for the benefit of machines. Bitcoin was created by people for people. And it is up to us, the people, to decide what we want out of Bitcoin and how we want it to behave. The protocol and the code and the math are all just tools that we use to coordinate among ourselves what we want Bitcoin to look like and to actually implement and enforce our design. But since they are just tools, they can be replaced. If we, the users of Bitcoin, agree that some new protocol is better than the old one, we can simply choose to switch to using the new protocol. To demonstrate this point, I'd like to discuss one of the most sacred of sacred cows in the Bitcoin protocol, the limit of inflation. The inflation limit of Bitcoin is something that must never be changed. But some people go as far as saying that it is technically impossible to change. That is false. Bitcoin users can easily agree to switch to a new protocol with a different inflation limit, or no limit at all. This is technically no different than any other change, such as a change in block size limit. The only difference is that changing the inflation limit will destroy the confidence in Bitcoin as a store of value, and thus no sane person will ever support such a change. But it is up to us, the people, to understand and decide that this is forbidden. The math and the code have no say in this. It is above their pay grade. So we understand that the protocol is controlled by us. The next question is, who is us? If everyone involved in Bitcoin agrees what needs to be done, there's no problem. We simply make the changes that everyone agrees on. Easy. But what if not everyone can come to an agreement? How will the decision be made? Who has a say in this? Another common misconception is that the power to decide the protocol is at the hands of miners. After all, the rules say that the block branch which has the most work put into it is the correct one. So, allegedly, a majority of miners can dictate the rules that they see fit. But this forgets a key part of the rule. The correct branch is the longest one among all valid branches. It doesn't say anything about accepting a long branch that follows a protocol different from what we consider valid. Consider the following scenario. 60% of the mining power decides to switch to some new incompatible protocol. Everyone else sticks with the original one. Users, merchants, exchanges, wallet services, and the remaining 40% of the miners. Every block mined by the 60% will be rejected by every node that hasn't switched. If they try to sell Bitcoins they have mined, they will not be able to do so, because no buyer will recognize what they're selling as valid Bitcoins. Meanwhile, the blocks mined by the 40% will form a separate blockchain with Bitcoins that are recognized as valuable. Soon the 60% will realize that they're mining a worthless currency and will switch to mining the original protocol so they can generate revenue again. So it is not just the miners that have a say on what the protocol will be. A majority of miners is definitely not enough to decide the protocol. Miners have to conform to the wishes of the people who give the currency value. You can't ignore the people willing to pay $650 per coin because you want them to actually want to buy your coins. You can't ignore the people who will not sell their own coins for less than $650 because on a protocol they dislike, they can sell their coins and crash their price. You can't ignore merchants willing to offer goods and services for Bitcoins. And you can't ignore wallet developers, wallet services, exchanges that act as proxies for the wishes of all these people. Ultimately, the Bitcoin protocol will be determined by the economic majority, the sum wishes of everyone involved in the system, weighted by how significant each one is in giving the system its value. But this analysis still doesn't clarify what is the mechanism by which the economic majority expresses its wishes. If you think about it, you'll see that the only way my description can make sense is if there is a possibility for the Bitcoin network to split in two, in such a way that every actor can decide which version they prefer. So I'll spend some time talking about how exactly such a split would look like. A split begins just like a unanimous change. A version of the Bitcoin code is written that says, starting from block X, the rules are this and that. I'm assuming that the new protocol and the old are completely incompatible, so that a transaction which is valid in one is invalid in the other. The difference is that with a unanimous change, everyone starts running this new code, and essentially the new protocol becomes the one true Bitcoin. With a contentious change, some people run the new code, but some still run the old code. At first, we will not notice any difference, but when we get to block X, we will suddenly have two different networks. Each network will have its own currency, its own nodes, its own miners. They will be completely separate, much like Bitcoin and Litecoin are separate. The only connection the two networks will have is a shared history. They both agree on which address owns which coins as of block X. Basically, someone who had a Bitcoin before the split will now have a Bitcoin A and a Bitcoin B, and he can use each independently. And every user, trader, and merchant can choose to use one of the coins, the other, or both. Much like they can currently choose which of the alts they would like to use, invest in, or accept as payment. Such a split can be short-term, medium-term, or long-term. In a short-term split, one of the networks soon realizes that it has virtually no support at all. Everyone is using the other currency. Due to the network effect, even those who prefer the protocol of Bitcoin A will be unable to use it. After a few days or a few weeks, even the supporters of Bitcoin A will abandon it and reluctantly start using Bitcoin B. Bitcoin A will die, and Bitcoin B, the network which has an economic majority, will emerge as the one true Bitcoin. In a medium-term split, both networks have significant support and they coexist for a while. But after several months or years, it becomes apparent that the protocol of Bitcoin A is problematic. It doesn't function as well as the network of Bitcoin B. And over time, people will switch from one to the other. Here too, Bitcoin B will ultimately emerge as the one true Bitcoin. In a long-term split, neither of the networks is clearly superior. Each has its own advantages and disadvantages, and each has its supporters and preferred use cases. This will result in two different currencies that will coexist indefinitely, which were both spawned from the same original coin. We must realize that anyone can initiate a split at any time, for any reason, or for no reason at all. This is a result of Bitcoin being based on open source code and an open ledger. Anyone who wishes Bitcoin to follow a different protocol can take the code, alter it, and start a new network, hoping others will join. Of course, doing this on every whim is impractical. The new network would have very few users and will quickly die out due to network effects. The resulting split would be extremely short-term, but everyone has an inviolable right to try. Nobody has to conform to the tyranny of the majority. Bitcoin is not a democracy. It is something much greater, a plurality, a system where everyone can choose their own path as long as they can find companions. All of this was known years ago, There is, however, one important difference between how I viewed this 5 years ago and how I view this now. I used to think that this was all a theoretical possibility, that the right to split existed only to make sure nobody has to exercise it, that the possibility of a split exists in the background as a threat to make sure everyone cooperates and decides on a reasonable protocol, much like the mutually assured destruction doctrine, which dictates that countries should keep a nuclear arsenal only to ensure they will never have to use it. I thought that a split is harmful and a thing to be avoided, and that there will not be a need to actually perform a split to see which way the economic majority goes. That people and companies will simply be able to share their views, and this way the result of any split could be estimated in advance. So there will not be a need to split. We can just unanimously choose the protocol which the economic majority prefers. But what I realized a year ago is that this is probably not sustainable forever. At some point, and we might be approaching this point, there will be disagreements so severe that they cannot be reconciled with discussion and compromise. Every party will demand that either everyone follows their vision or that it will split off on its own. This became apparent when the plans for Bitcoin XT were released, and the block size debate stopped being about the block size and became about Bitcoin's governance. The difference between Bitcoin Core and Bitcoin XT wasn't that one had 1 megabyte blocks and the other had 20 megabyte blocks. It was that Bitcoin Core was governed by a team of developers trying to reach consensus, and Bitcoin XT was governed by a dictator. Now, it's not immediately obvious that the dictator for Bitcoin is bad. Remember, the ultimate power is not at the hand of the dictator, but at the hands of the people who can choose which version of Bitcoin to use. But that's still not a very satisfying governance model. For a decentralized system, I would like the day-to-day decision-making to be a bit more decentralized than a dictator. We don't want to start a split whenever we disagree with one person. Bitcoin XT is now dead, and Bitcoin Classic is the new Bitcoin XT. Instead of a dictator model, it is based on a voting model, or popularity contests, as I like to call them. This also isn't very satisfying, since decision power is given to people who may not have the expertise to make the correct decisions. Many people would disagree with me on this, which is exactly my point. If you thought reaching agreement on technical aspects of the protocol is hard, reaching agreement on the governance model is even harder. So here we are, with people from two different philosophies that cannot be reconciled. To be honest, I'm not entirely sure where we stand on this matter right now and how wide the support of Bitcoin Classic or Bitcoin Unlimited is. But if we haven't reached the point of no return yet, we will probably reach it sometime in a future round of this debate or a different debate. Many people assume that in such a case, we have a winner-takes-all elections. Everyone chooses a side, tries as hard as he can to convince everyone to switch to his side, and one side will eventually win. This is a problem for two reasons. One, a lot of energy is wasted on fruitless arguments and flame wars. Two, in the end, we'll come up with a decision that will leave a large portion of Bitcoin users unsatisfied, resentful even. The alternative, of course, is to split the network in two. This way, people can stop trying to convince others to switch to their side. They can focus on making sure their side works as well as possible. This option is shunned in most discussions because it is considered to be too disruptive and harmful. That is what I used to think as well. But I'm here to advocate a position that if it comes to that, it's really not such a bad option after all. Now, there will definitely be bad aspects. It will be confusing, it will weaken the network effect, it will look bad. But if you look at it from the perspective of different users of the system, you'll see that a split right now will not impact them more than they can handle. An investor more or less keeps the value of their investment after a split, and then she will simply have two currency options to invest in. A merchant that just wants to accept Bitcoin doesn't need to make any choice. He teams up with a payment processor, as he always has, and the processor decides which version of Bitcoin to accept. A Bitcoin enthusiast that goes and pays with Bitcoin will have to figure out which version to use and when. But it's okay, he can handle it. He's an enthusiast. If the split turns out to be long-term, at some point people will have had enough of two currencies with identical or very similar names. Then one of the coins will simply have to go rebranding, finalizing the split into unrelated currencies. On the positive side, embracing forks is what allows the cryptocurrency ecosystem to be truly competitive. Whenever we disagree about the best protocol to use, no problem. We just pit the two versions against each other and may the best currency win. This also gives rise to the concept of Bitcoin as a living organism. Instead of a rigid set of rules, it is an organic creature. It can sire offspring, it can mutate, the weak die out, the fit survive, and Bitcoin as a whole becomes stronger as a result. You could say that a split will hurt the perception of Bitcoin. It can be deemed too confusing and unorthodox, and a sign of weakness that the community cannot reach an agreement. But I view this the same way that I view exaggerated reports about Bitcoin's demise. The first time the newspaper said Bitcoin was dead, sure, there may have been a concern that Bitcoin's reputation was irreversibly harmed. But by now, there have been over 100 reports that Bitcoin is dead. In my opinion, every such report makes Bitcoin stronger, not weaker, because it demonstrates how much Bitcoin can go through and still carry on. Likewise, the first time Bitcoin splits, it might lead to some bad press, but after everyone gets used to the whole Bitcoin evolution thing, they will realize that each split is not a bad thing. Now, there is one big problem with everything I've said so far. I've assumed that when there are two camps, each running their own protocol version, the network will simply split in two. But there are technical reasons why it's not that simple. First, if the two protocols maintain the same transaction structure, then the same piece of data that encodes a valid transaction on one network also encodes a valid transaction on the other network. When a user tries to send bitcoins of network A, the transaction could accidentally be picked up by network B, and the user will send coins he did not intend. The solution is to have some sort of transaction versioning system that makes sure the transactions are incompatible between the two networks. At least one of the networks has to cooperate with the idea for this to work. The other problem is with mining and the hash function. It can be shown that when there are two significant separate networks, both using mining based on the same hardware, and all miners try to maximize their profits, the hash rate will go back and forth between the two networks, and the difficulty of each will wildly oscillate. This creates serious stability issues. One possible fix is to make sure that at least one of the networks switches to a different hash function. These two issues demonstrate that while a split is possible, we need to be prepared for it on the technical level. We need to acknowledge that we're going for a split and set up accordingly. If we have an accidental split with two camps that each think their way is the only one to go, the results can be disastrous. I want to clarify that what I said is not descriptive, it is normative. It explains what should happen, not necessarily what will happen. If people do not accept my vision, if they continue with their only one Bitcoin mentality, if they try to discredit and attack versions of Bitcoin that are not their favorite, then a split may not be possible. I think that we will be worse off if we live in a world where Bitcoin cannot be split. And this is precisely why I try to advocate the merits of splitting. Now I'd like to talk about a connection this all has with some recent events. We've all heard about the recent hack in the DAO, and we've heard the talks about hard forks and rollbacks. Some people support the rollback, some don't. Here too, there might be disagreements so great that they will lead to a split of Ethereum into two separate networks, one which believes in rollbacks and one which does not. There's a lot more I have to say about this, but I've left some out because I didn't want the talk to get too long. I'll point out two blog posts I've written about the subject: How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Fork, and I Disapprove of Bitcoin Splitting, but I'll defend to the death its right to do it. This talk is largely based on these two posts, and they cover some details I haven't discussed now. And of course, if there's anything important I've left out, or if anything wasn't clear, I'll be happy to answer some questions now. First, we have two questions from Free Trader. I'll just read the questions. Looking at present and near future, how would you evaluate Adam Beck's statement that controversial hardforks cannot happen? Do you have any advice to current Asic miners? So, I'm not sure I remember all of Adam Beck's arguments right now, but it depends a lot on how exactly we try to do the hard forks. I think Adam is relating to the issue of mining and what miners will do. And yeah, there are some problems. I think Adam is probably referring to the fact that if you have two separate networks, each based on the same type of mining, then at any point a miner will choose to mine on the network that has the best profitability, which is the current ratio of exchange rate to difficulty. And at any one point, one of the networks will be superior. So either all miners will go to this network, or all miners will go to that network. And this is, of course, a problem, because at any point there will be a network which has no mining at all, which of course it cannot work that way, and then the difficulty will oscillate very widely. So because one period all miners are on one network, so the difficulty will go up, and when the difficulty will go up, everyone will switch to the other network, and again it's very unstable, and this is an issue, and probably what Adam was talking about, but this can be solved in one of several ways. The most obvious one is that one of the networks, let's say the more noble one, the one more intent to doing this cleanly, it will simply switch to a different hash function. Okay, I said simply, but it's not really simply at all. It's a pretty big change just on its own, which leads me to a point which I didn't really cover, that I think in general, without any regard to the whole hard forking and splitting and the stuff, the Bitcoin system needs to start being more friendly towards changes in hash functions. So, you know, it's possible that one day there will be found some weaknesses in SHA-256, and we want to switch to different hash functions, and we need to have some mechanism in place to make these transitions smoother. So, for example, one idea that is pretty old is to have a gradual transition. So, over time, there are some predefined ratios. Some blocks need to be with one function, and some blocks need to be with the other, and these ratios change over time. So, this is an example of how we need to be more accommodating to the possibility of changing hash functions. And again, if you do a contentious hard fork when changing the hash function along the way, then there will not be this game between the miners, especially if both functions are ASIC based and you need different ASICs for each, then it's not a problem. If the hash functions are CPU based, then there might still be a problem, but I guess CPU is enough of a commodity that it's not really going to be a problem, because you know everyone has CPU, so you'll have the miners for this network and the miners for that network. And also this problem will be greatly alleviated if another change is made to the Bitcoin protocol, which is making much more rapid difficulty changes, or in general more sophisticated difficulty recycling mechanisms. This can definitely alleviate this problem. So the bottom line is there can be a contentious hard fork, but we need to be prepared for it technically. And if we agree that it is a good idea on the economic level, then we should prepare for it technically as well. So Leonard is asking, what is your view on doing a fork with only a minority of the hash rate, says 5 to 10%? So yeah, I think 5 to 10%, I think it's enough to have a viable fork if, like I said, we prepare technically correctly, and if these 5 to 10% have a strong enough conviction that they can endure the lesser network effects because they think the protocol is so much better and they will continue using it. So I guess this is pretty much the threshold for a viable split. Okay, so we have another question from Free Trader. What is your view on how time-locked transactions and in future construct indefinitely in payment channels are affected by splits or hard forks? So, okay, so I need to think about it a bit, I guess. I think that okay, so it might be the case that I'm making some technical error here, but when someone creates a micropayment channel, I think he should do so under the assumption that the coins will be locked on both sides of the split. So if you start the payment channel before the split, then after the split you should have to separate payment channels, one in each network. It might complicate a bit the issue of the versioning of the transactions, but I guess it should be possible. And afterwards, when you actually want to, actually, it's a good question, because if you started the payment with a transaction which is based on an original protocol, then there might be some problems with the version for the transactions that actually send the payments through it. So let's say I don't have an immediate answer right now. I guess I need to think about it some more. But I think, again, if the parties that each splits to its own thing, if they cooperate and if they think together about how to define the transaction structure so that there will be no confusion, I think it should work out okay. Seems like you are suggesting that split should just happen, maybe planned, instead of getting miners to switch software before a split. It should just be implemented and for the economic majority to choose. So if I understand the question correctly, so basically no, because even when I'm talking about doing a split, the split is preparing in advance. So for example, we will never release new code that says the protocol has changed and expect anyone to download it. Every change we want to do, we'll always say this change takes hold starting with some block. And then what we will expect is that miners and Bitcoin nodes will download and run this code in advance, and only when the designated blocks come, only then we will see an actual difference. So any case changes should be delayed to some specified time in the future, and yeah, and then the split will happen when that time comes. So I hope that answers the question. Okay, so there's a question, what is the full list of things that should be done? So on the technical front, on the preparations for the fork, so I think the two issues I mentioned are the two big things. So I think I pretty much covered the base requirements. Of course, each of the actually needs its own discussion, how to do it exactly and what and all that. So, so as far as I know, there isn't any other major thing that needs to be done. But of course, I could be wrong. I mean, I I only have a limited understanding of the protocol and the working in the code and so on. So part of the preparation is to have more brainstorming and have more people come up with ideas on which preparations we need to do. So that's why first we should reach some sort of agreement that we want to prepare for a fork, and then we need to come up with all the technical things. But often, I think it's pretty much just the things that I said. Another question by Free Trader: do you think that the market would support more than 2 splits at one time, or would the market lose confidence? So yeah, I spoke mostly about the split just to 2, but I think this generalizes easily to a split into more than 2, and I think the market will not mind. Of course, it will be even more confusing, but actually, I think if we reach a point that we want to do a contentious fork, and there are enough camps with different philosophies, I think it might be a good idea to take this opportunity to actually split to more than 2 and have several competing currencies. And again, the best currency will win. And I don't think it is any more problematic than splitting to just 2. How can network defense be incentivized to protect splits, given that the split might start off at low valuation? Is this something the wider industry should look at? Well, so in general, I think that a smaller network has less defense on one hand, but less incentive to attack on the other hand. Right? So if there is a split to 2 networks, which let's say that one is 90% in all aspects, the exchange rate and mining power and so on, and the other is 10%. So the smaller network will be weaker, but on the other hand, no one will really want to attack it because it's too small and there's not a lot of value there. Now, a possible scenario, especially in the case where the 2 networks try to use the same hash function, is an attack by the majority of the miners that already have the infrastructure to attack. It will be fairly easy for them to do this attack, but in reality, I don't think this is any different than any other attack scenario. And also, if you use a different hash function, then you don't have this particular attack vector. Now, in general, you could always think of things like merge mining. So, for example, this is probably less of a pure split in the way that I presented it. But if one of the networks knows that it's going to be a minority, then it may as well just give up on its own mining and be merged mined with the other network, which is more popular, more stronger, and maybe after it proves to everyone that it's the better one, it starts getting more traction, maybe then it can switch to its own mining network. So yes, I think that's basically what I have to say about this issue. Yeah, so I think that's enough questions for now. Of course, I'm available in other channels as well, so if anyone still wants to ask me something, I'll be happy to try to talk about it. So that's it for now, and thank you all for listening.
Thank you very much, Meni. That was great. I think that was quite an interesting topic, and one that people should really look into and really feel that it is something that shouldn't be avoided. It should be something that everybody should actually understand very clearly. Thanks very much.